Anneliese Michel was born on September 21, 1952, in Liebelfing, Bavaria, into a conservative Catholic family. The Michels were strict, but loving. Her mother, Anna, taught her daughters that purity and obedience were the path to heaven. Her father, Joseph, worked as a carpenter and believed the world was losing its moral compass. Neighbors remembered the Michels as quiet people, the kind who prayed before every meal and never missed Mass. Anneliese was gentle, recalled a schoolmate in a 1977 interview. She blushed easily and prayed even during lunch breaks. We thought she would become a nun. Anneliese's early years were ordinary. She played piano, sang in the church choir, and dreamed of teaching children. But around age 16, her life began to unravel. It was 1968 when it began. During class at her high school in Aschaffenburg, Anneliese suddenly froze. Her body stiffened, eyes rolled back, and she fell to the floor, convulsing violently. Teachers rushed her to a doctor. The diagnosis, epilepsy. Her parents were told it was treatable. She began medication, first Dilantin, then carbamazepine, but the seizures continued. She was hospitalized at the neurological clinic in Würzburg, where doctors documented something more troubling than seizures. Anneliese reported seeing dark faces. She said the air would grow cold, and the faces would whisper, "You are damned." Medical records from that period note: patient exhibits signs of depression, guilt fixation, and religious hallucinations associated with epileptic disorder. She was placed under psychiatric supervision, but her faith deepened rather than weakened. When doctors told her the visions were products of her illness, Anneliese reportedly replied, "If this is illness, then why does the devil laugh?" By 1970, the family had moved back to Klingenberg, into a two-story house near the woods. The local parish church's bells could be heard from her window, but the atmosphere in the home had changed, heavy, watchful. Anneliese's mother would later describe nights when she heard footsteps upstairs while everyone was asleep. Her father dismissed it as the old wood creaking, but even he admitted the house felt colder. Anneliese returned home from school exhausted and withdrawn. She stopped eating. She stopped smiling. At night, she whispered prayers until her voice broke. Her diaries from that time, later recovered by investigators, reveal the slow descent into terror. I wake up in the dark. Something presses on my chest. I can't move. I can't pray. It's inside my room. Mother says I am just sick, but no medicine stops it. The thing waits for me when I am alone. Her condition worsened. She began to hear voices, guttural, male, mocking her faith. "You will burn in hell. You belong to us." Doctors increased her medication. Priests offered comfort but avoided talk of possession. Between 1971 and 1973, Anneliese was admitted several more times to psychiatric facilities. She was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and psychotic depression. Yet, despite heavy doses of medication, her symptoms intensified. Witnesses say she began to refuse sacred objects. Crucifixes made her tremble. She claimed she could not enter a chapel without being repelled by an invisible force. Her mother recalled an episode vividly. She stood before the picture of the Virgin Mary and spat on it. Then she screamed in a voice that was not her own. Doctors labeled it a psychotic break. But the family, deeply religious, began to suspect something darker. In September 1973, Anneliese wrote to a friend from university. "People are telling me I am sick, but I know it is not sickness. I am losing myself. I can feel something inside me that hates prayer." She begged the church for help. Her local parish priest, Father Ernst Alt, met her that autumn. His notes read, "She does not appear insane. There is something extraordinary about her suffering. She told me she could not drink holy water, that it burned her lips." Father Alt requested permission from the Bishop of Würzburg to conduct an exorcism. The bishop refused. He ordered continued medical care instead. Alt continued to meet Anneliese in secret. In his letters, he described her as a soul in torment, imprisoned by invisible chains. By 1974, Her behavior had become increasingly violent. She destroyed rosaries, tore her clothes, and screamed for hours. At night, the family reported the sound of animals growling through her throat, a voice that spoke in Latin and cursed the church. Recordings made later would capture those voices, but even early accounts terrified the local community. Her sister Roswitha described one evening. Anneliese was on the floor, her hands clenched like claws. She barked. She bit us when we tried to hold her down. Then she began shouting names I didn't understand. Despite the horror, the family's faith did not falter. They began praying the rosary every night, believing prayer would hold the darkness at bay. But Anneliese began to say that the Virgin Mary no longer heard her. In her last journal entry before the official exorcisms began, she wrote, "I am nothing. Everything I do is a sin. I wish to suffer for others, but I cannot bear the voices. They will not let me sleep. Please, dear God, free me from myself." In September 1975, Father Alt again appealed to the church hierarchy. This time, after psychiatric reports and personal testimony, Bishop Joseph Stangl approved a formal ritual Romanum exorcism to be conducted by Father Arnold Renz, assisted by Father Alt. The decision was recorded officially on September 24, 1975. The authorization stated that Anneliese Michel was believed to be possessed by demonic forces, given clear aversion to sacred symbols and inability to live a normal life despite medical treatment. Over the next 10 months, 42 exorcism sessions would be conducted, recorded on tape, documented by witnesses, and remembered as one of the most controversial religious rituals of the 20th century. The line between faith and psychosis had blurred. What began as illness was now being fought as possession. And as the priests prepared their holy water and prayers, no one could imagine the darkness that awaited them. By 1974, the Michels' hope in medicine had thinned. Their daughter had seen doctors, psychiatrists, and neurologists. None could halt her decline. When faith became the final language they trusted, the church reopened its ancient ritual. The Diocese of Würzburg required evidence of genuine possession. Father Ernst Alt submitted a 40-page report documenting incidents that he and the family considered inexplicable. Resistance to holy water, inability to enter a church, and knowledge of prayers in Latin she had never studied. Bishop Joseph Stangl ordered a brief inquiry. 2 theologians and a physician interviewed Anneliese in autumn 1975. The doctor again diagnosed epileptic psychosis and recommended treatment. The theologians recorded her aversion to sacred objects but offered no conclusion. After reviewing both opinions, the bishop granted permission for an exorcism ad modum probationis, a trial rite on September 24, 1975. It would be conducted privately in her parents' home by Father Arnold Renz, a Capuchin priest with Father Alt assisting. Hospital charts from the neurological clinic in Würzburg show that Anneliese's anti-seizure medication had been adjusted several times. Her weight had fallen, her sleep was irregular, and she suffered bouts of severe depression. Psychiatrists later testified that her symptoms matched those of temporal lobe epilepsy combined with psychosis and religious delusion. She continued to take medication during the first months of the exorcisms, a fact later central to the criminal trial. The initial ritual was performed on September 24, 1975 in the Michel family's living room. Witnesses described prayers, scripture readings, and sprinkling of holy water according to the Ritual Romanum of 1614. No physical coercion was used, and the rite lasted about 2 hours. Father Renz kept a detailed log noting Anneliese's alternating calm and agitation. He wrote, "At times she prays with full clarity. At others, she retreats inward as though listening to something unseen." More sessions followed, roughly once or twice a week. Tapes were made for ecclesiastical review, 42 in total, each dated and sealed. These recordings, later released in court, captured long periods of prayer, singing of hymns, and episodes of distress. The church maintained them as internal documentation. The family viewed them as proof that a struggle of faith was taking place. Locals in Klingenberg began to talk. Visitors saw clergy entering the Michel house at odd hours. The family tried to keep privacy, but rumors spread quickly in a small Bavarian town. Doctors who had treated Anneliese grew increasingly concerned. One psychiatrist visited her at home and advised immediate hospitalization, warning that she was in danger of physical collapse. The family, fearing institutionalization and convinced that spiritual help was working, chose to continue the rites. Letters exchanged between Fathers Renz and Alt reveal their uncertainty. Renz wrote in November 1975, "If she were simply ill, I would gladly see her cured by medicine. Yet her reactions to the prayers cannot be feigned." Alt responded, "We must proceed carefully. Whether possession or illness, our duty is compassion and prayer." Both priests requested guidance from the bishop, who authorized continuation of the ritual but insisted that medical treatment should not be discontinued. That tension between therapy and theology defined the months that followed. Anneliese's health deteriorated through the winter. She ate little, slept poorly, and withdrew from university classes at Würzburg. Friends who visited described her as fragile but lucid. She often spoke of offering her suffering for the youth and for priests who had lost faith. Family photographs from that winter show a thin young woman in a sweater and headscarf, standing beside her father near the family's barn. Her expression is weary but composed. Medical records note her weight had fallen below 40 kilograms. A physician again urged hospitalization. The parents declined, citing improvement in her spiritual state. Within the diocese, opinion was divided. Some clergy worried that allowing an exorcism in modern Germany would invite ridicule. Others argued that denying it would abandon a suffering believer. Minutes from a December 1975 clergy meeting record Bishop Stangl saying, "We act not against medicine but alongside it. Should the doctors heal, Deo gratias. Should they fail, the Church must still pray." No one expected the ordeal to last much longer. Yet the following months brought further decline. Anna Michel later told investigators that her daughter experienced alternating periods of calm and despair. On good days she would play the piano softly, on bad days she would weep and refuse to eat. The parents interpreted the pattern as moments of deliverance followed by renewed assault. They increased household prayers and attended Mass daily. Relatives visiting from nearby towns found the atmosphere in the home somber, almost monastic. By the turn of the year 1976, Anneliese's condition had become critical. Her muscles weakened. She could barely climb stairs. Nevertheless, she insisted on continuing the sessions, believing that endurance was part of her calling. Father Renz noted in his diary, "She asked that we continue until completion, saying she must finish the task. We agreed only after ensuring she would keep taking nourishment." Doctors who saw her in January confirmed severe exhaustion and dehydration but found no new neurological cause. They recommended rest and therapy. Her family interpreted the advice as insufficient. By late spring 1976, Anneliese's weight and strength were dangerously low. The exorcisms, still authorized, continued intermittently. The priests recorded shorter sessions to spare her energy, yet the toll was visible. In May, she dictated to her mother what she called a testament of faith, asking that it be read to the parish youth group after her recovery. It ended with the line, "I wish to stay faithful until the end." None of them knew that within 2 months she would be dead, and the events inside that modest Bavarian house would lead to one of the most controversial court cases in modern religious history. As the winter of 1975 turned to spring, medicine, law, and faith stood on opposite sides of the same tragedy. What the Michels called salvation, prosecutors would later call negligence. The final sessions of 1976 would decide both her fate and the Church's. Records show that the formal rites were still being performed once or twice each week in the Michel home. Father Renz's notes indicate that the sessions were shortened as Anneliese weakened. Medical instructions required that she continue anticonvulsant medication, though she often resisted swallowing tablets. Doctors visiting the home urged hospital care. The parents hesitated, afraid that admission would halt the church-approved ritual. They told friends that their daughter insisted on remaining, where the prayers were being said. By March, She was severely underweight and suffered frequent fevers. Renz's diary entry for March 21st reads, "She appears exhausted, pulse rapid. We prayed briefly and ended early. She thanked us quietly." The local physician, Dr. Richard Roth, examined her on several occasions at the family's request. He later testified that he recognized the seriousness of her condition but believed she was still receiving outside medical attention. In later interviews, he described the household as completely focused on faith. At the same time, Father Alt wrote to the bishop describing his anxiety. "Her body weakens, but her conviction grows. I fear we are watching a human life slip away in pursuit of grace. There is no evidence that the diocese ordered the rites to stop. According to church procedure, once authorization had been given, only the bishop could rescind it. No such order was issued." Anneliese's university friends visited occasionally and later testified that she looked frail and withdrawn but remained courteous. One friend recalled that she whispered, "Please keep praying for me." In early May, she began dictating short reflections to her mother, what investigators later called her spiritual testament. The writings spoke of endurance and trust in God's mercy. Father Renz noted that she could barely kneel or stand. Sessions were reduced to a few minutes of prayer, often with long breaks so she could rest. On the night of June 30th, 1976, Father Renz and Father Alt conducted what became the last session of prayer. Both later stated that Anneliese requested absolution and asked to stop the ritual the next day. She received communion and expressed gratitude to the priests and her family. In the early hours of July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died in her room at the age of 23. When a physician arrived, he found no signs of violence. Cause of death was later determined to be malnutrition and dehydration following long-term illness and exhaustion. The death was reported to authorities. An autopsy confirmed extreme physical weakness but found no trace of disease beyond the neurological condition previously diagnosed. The prosecutor's office opened a case against the two priests and the parents for negligent homicide. The trial, held in Aschaffenburg in March 1978, lasted almost a year after extensive investigation. The defense argued that the family had relied on official church approval and had continued medication alongside prayer. The prosecution maintained that medical care had been fatally neglected. Tapes and diaries were presented in court. Experts debated whether Anneliese's symptoms stemmed from epilepsy, psychosis, or religious conviction. The court concluded that the defendants believed they were helping her but had misjudged the danger of omitting hospital treatment. All four were convicted of manslaughter through negligence and given suspended sentences. The ruling emphasized that the tragedy lay not in cruelty but in mistaken faith. Anneliese was buried in Klingenberg Cemetery, where her grave became a quiet site of pilgrimage for some local believers. The diocese later announced stricter rules for exorcisms, requiring psychological evaluation and episcopal supervision in every case. In later interviews, both priests expressed remorse but insisted they had acted according to conscience and church law at the time. The Vatican subsequently revised the Rituale Romanum, 1999 edition, to include explicit cooperation with medical professionals. Scholars, psychiatrists, and theologians still cite the case as a turning point in modern debates about faith, illness, and responsibility. Anneliese Michel's story is remembered not for proof of possession, but for the collision between belief and medicine. In a modern country, within living memory, a family's devotion led them beyond science's reach. What remains is not a verdict of guilt or sanctity, only a warning of how faith and fear can entwine. After the courtrooms emptied, Anneliese Michel's story did not fade. It left behind documents, recordings, and a question still unanswered. What happens when belief and medicine lose trust in each other? The 1978 verdict drew global attention. German newspapers framed it as the first exorcism trial of the modern era. Editorials debated whether religion had collided with reason or simply revealed how fragile both could be under suffering. The Catholic Diocese of Würzburg issued a statement expressing sympathy for the Michel family and reaffirming the Church's stance that medical science must precede any ritual of exorcism. The bishop who had authorized the rite never again granted similar permission. In the decades that followed, church authorities quietly reviewed the old Rituale Romanum. By 1999, a new version of the exorcism rite was published under Pope John Paul II. It required that every suspected possession case first undergo psychiatric and medical evaluation, and that cooperation with doctors continue throughout any spiritual intervention. The Anneliese Michel case is often cited in theological studies as one of the catalysts for that reform, an example of how pastoral care must adapt to contemporary understanding of illness. Researchers in psychology and religion used the case as material for study. German psychiatrist Dr. Hans Kunzel wrote that Anneliese's symptoms matched temporal lobe epilepsy, combined with psychotic depression and intense cultural religiosity. Theologians, however, cautioned against reducing all spiritual experiences to illness. Professor Winfried Heidt, writing in a 1985 symposium, observed, "Her tragedy lies in a time when science and faith ceased speaking the same language." Universities later incorporated the trial into ethics and law courses as an example of how religious freedom and public health responsibilities can clash. During the 1980s, journalists revisited the case for television documentaries in Germany and Austria. International awareness grew when screenwriters adapted the story into fiction. Requiem, Germany, 2006. A subdued drama based on court transcripts. The Exorcism of Emily Rose, USA, 2005. A courtroom horror hybrid inspired loosely by the events. Both films renewed debate but also drew criticism from those close to the family, who felt the portrayals dramatized a deeply personal tragedy. Anneliese Michel's grave in Klingenberg am Main remains modest. A small stone, flowers, and votive candles. Some visitors come out of curiosity. Others come to pray. The local parish discourages sensationalism, emphasizing that the site is simply a family grave. Each year on the anniversary of her death, small groups still gather to recite the rosary. The diocese neither endorses nor forbids it. Officials describe these gatherings as private acts of remembrance rather than veneration. 40-plus years later, theologians, physicians, and sociologists continue to cite the case in conferences and textbooks. It sits at the crossroads of faith versus medicine, how to respect religious interpretation without endangering health, law versus conscience, where moral intent collides with legal responsibility, culture versus individual suffering, how a community's belief system shapes illness narratives. Every new article reopens the same dilemma that haunted the small Bavarian house in 1976. When should prayer yield to treatment, and who decides? Anneliese Michel's name survives not as proof of the supernatural, nor as evidence against faith, but as testimony to human limits. Her story warns both the church and medicine that compassion must never become certainty. History remembers Anneliese Michel not as a saint or a symbol, but as a person whose suffering forced a reckoning between faith and reason. The questions her life raised still echo, in hospitals, in churches, and in every family torn between belief and doubt.